Welcome to the Fragments of Me. This channel shares fictional emotional stories inspired by real-life situations. All characters and events are created for storytelling and entertainment purposes only.
I met Luis in college when I was studying social work, and he was wasting his time on some game design program. Even then, I could tell he was different from the other guys. More cynical, sure. But there was something about the way he looked at me when I talked about wanting to help people that made me think he actually got it. Most people just nodded along when I explained why I chose social work over something more lucrative. But Luis seemed genuinely impressed by my commitment to making a real difference in the world. Not that he was doing anything particularly meaningful himself, but at least he recognized quality when he saw it. We dated through college, and I have to admit, there was a certain appeal to being with someone who balanced out my idealism with his more practical worldview. He'd listened to me vent about my fieldwork placements, about how broken the system was, and how many people were falling through the cracks. And he'd actually engage instead of just waiting for his turn to talk about whatever game he was working on. Don't get me wrong, the game stuff was always there in the background. Him and his roommate Alan were constantly huddled over their computers, coding some ridiculous fantasy adventure thing. But he made time for what mattered. He made time for me and for understanding why my work was important. We got married a few years after graduation, right around the time his little hobby project with Alan was starting to turn into an actual business. I was already climbing the ranks at the NGO where I'd started as a caseworker, specializing in helping underprivileged communities navigate housing assistance and job placement programs. Real work, the kind that actually changed lives, instead of just entertaining people. Luis's game studio was doing well enough, I guess, but I never really paid attention to the financial side of things. I was too busy dealing with actual human problems to worry about profit margins and user engagement metrics. The thing about working with people who have been failed by every system they've ever encountered is that you develop a pretty good radar for spotting the ones who just need someone to believe in them. So when Dwayne walked into my office about 8 months ago, I could tell immediately that he was different from the usual clients who came through our doors. Sure, he had the same story: rough neighborhood, limited opportunities, a few mistakes that kept following him around. But there was something in his eyes that told me he was ready to do the work if someone would just give him a real chance. He was tall, probably 6'2", with these broad shoulders and calloused hands that made it obvious he wasn't afraid of physical labor. His intake form listed a bunch of minor charges from when he was younger. The kind of stupid stuff that happens when you grow up in a place where survival sometimes means making choices that look bad on paper but make perfect sense in context. Domestic violence, assault and battery, something about an illegal firearm. But when I looked at him sitting across from my desk, trying so hard to make a good impression in a button-down shirt that was clearly borrowed from someone smaller, all I could see was potential. "I know how this looks," he said during our first meeting, gesturing at his paperwork. "But I'm trying to do better, you know? I got kids I need to take care of, and I can't keep going the way I've been going." That's when I knew I was dealing with someone special. Most clients came in with elaborate excuses or defensive attitudes, but Dwayne was just honest about where he'd been and where he wanted to go. He talked about wanting stable work, about being tired of disappointing the people who mattered to him, about finally being ready to be the man his children deserved. And when he looked at me, really looked at me, not just polite eye contact but actual seeing, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Recognition, appreciation for who I was and what I was trying to do. Luis had been getting more and more distant lately, buried in work and constantly stressed about deadlines and investor meetings and all the other corporate bullshit that came with running a successful business. Success, it turned out, was just another word for having no time for your wife and no interest in the things that actually mattered. Our conversations had devolved into logistics. Who was picking up groceries, whether we needed to call the landscaper, what time his mother expected us for Sunday dinner. When I tried to tell him about my cases, about the families I was helping, or the small victories that made all the bureaucratic nightmare worthwhile, he'd nod and make appropriate noises, but I could tell his mind was somewhere else entirely. Dwayne listened. When I stayed late at the office to help him work on job applications, he asked questions about my other clients, about how I'd gotten into social work, about what kept me motivated when the system seemed designed to coercion people like him. He remembered details from our previous conversations, followed up on things I'd mentioned in passing, treated my work like it was the most important thing in the world. Because to him, it was. I was literally the difference between him getting his life together and falling back into the same patterns that had been trapping him since childhood. "You're different from the other people who work here," he told me one evening when we were the last ones in the building. "Like, you actually give a damn. Most of these folks, they just want to get through their day and go home to their nice houses and pretend people like me don't exist. But you see me, You see who I really am, not just what's on that paper." And he was right. I did see him. I saw past the criminal record and the rough edges to the man underneath who was genuinely trying to change his life. When he put his hand over mine while I was explaining some housing program requirements, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. When he kissed me that first time, right there in my office with the fluorescent lights humming overhead and case files scattered across my desk, it wasn't some sordid affair. It was two people recognizing something real and honest between them. I'm not stupid. I knew it was complicated, knew there were protocols and professional boundaries and all sorts of rules about maintaining appropriate relationships with clients. But sometimes you have to choose between following arbitrary bureaucratic guidelines and actually helping someone, between protecting your own ass and doing what's right for the person who needs you most. Dwayne needed me in ways that Luis had forgotten how to need anyone. He needed my support, my advocacy, my belief in his potential. And yeah, he needed my love too, the kind of passionate, all-consuming connection that I'd given up hope of ever finding again. For months, I managed to keep everything balanced. I'd spend my days doing my regular casework, helping Dwayne navigate job interviews and housing applications, and all the other steps toward building a stable life. Then I'd go home to Luis and his endless work calls and his complete lack of interest in anything that didn't involve pixels and code. It wasn't ideal, but it worked. Dwayne was making real progress. He'd landed a construction job, found a decent apartment, even started talking about getting his GED. And I was finally feeling like myself again, like someone who mattered, like a woman, instead of just a convenient accessory to Luis's increasingly successful career. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Tuesday morning when Luis barely acknowledged me over breakfast. Not unusual in itself. He'd been getting more and more withdrawn lately. Probably stressed about some new project or investor drama. But there was something different about his silence. More deliberate. When I asked if everything was okay, he just shrugged and said work was busy. But he wouldn't meet my eyes when he said it. Over the next few days, his behavior got stranger. He'd watch me when he thought I wasn't looking, study my face like he was trying to solve some puzzle. When my phone buzzed with text messages, he'd glance over with this weird intensity that made my skin crawl. And the way he responded to normal conversation, like when I mentioned staying late at work or having a difficult case, felt calculated somehow, like he was filing away information for later use. "Are you feeling okay?" I asked him Thursday night when I found him just sitting in the living room, not watching TV or reading or doing anything. Just staring at the wall. "You've been acting strange all week." "Just tired," he said, but his voice had this flat quality that didn't sound like tiredness at all. "Long week at work." I should have pressed him on it, should have demanded to know what was really going on, but honestly, I had bigger things to worry about. Dwayne was going through a rough patch. His boss was giving him shit about missing too many days, his ex was causing drama about child support, the usual chaos that seemed to follow him everywhere despite his best efforts to get his life together. He needed my support more than ever, and I wasn't about to let Luis's weird mood swings distract me from what really mattered. "I don't know what I'd do without you," Dwayne told me that Friday night when we met at his apartment after work. "Seriously, Ariana, you're the only good thing in my life right now. The only person who believes in me." And that's when it hit me. Not just the words, but the way he said them. The way he looked at me like I was some kind of miracle. When was the last time Luis had looked at me like that? When was the last time he'd needed me for anything more than remembering his mother's birthday or picking up his dry cleaning? I was 28 years old, still young enough to remember what it felt like to be desired, to be essential to someone's happiness and well-being. With Dwayne, I wasn't just a wife going through the motions. I was a lifeline, a source of strength, a woman worth fighting for. That night when I got home, Luis was waiting for me in the living room. Not reading, not on his phone, just sitting there in the dark like some kind of serial killer. "We need to talk," he said. My heart jumped, but I kept my voice steady. "About what?" "Sit down." There was something in his tone that made me want to run, but I forced myself to take the chair across from him. Whatever this was, I could handle it. I'd been handling everything else just fine. "I know about you and Dwayne." The words hung in the air between us like smoke. For a second, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at his face and try to figure out how much he actually knew versus how much he was guessing. But then my brain kicked back into gear, and I realized this didn't have to be the end of the world. People had conversations about these things. Marriages survived complicated situations all the time. "Are you sure we have to go that way?" I asked. "I mean, can't we just talk about whatever's bothering you?" He laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Talk about what's bothering me? Ariana, I know everything. I know about the affair, I know about the pregnancy, I know about his criminal record and his 4 other baby mamas and the fact that he can barely write a coherent text message. I know you've been trying to get me drunk so you could fuck me and pretend the baby might be mine. I know you've been lying to my face for months while you played house with some deadbeat thug who doesn't even pay taxes." The pregnancy. Shit. I'd only found out 3 days ago, had barely had time to process it myself, let alone figure out how to handle the situation. And somehow Luis knew about it before I'd even had a chance to tell Dwayne properly. That meant he'd been going through my phone, reading my messages, probably stalking my social media like some kind of psychopath. "You went through my private messages?" I said. "That's a violation of my privacy, Luis. That's not okay." "Your privacy?" His voice was getting louder now, more emotional. "You're worried about your fucking privacy? You're pregnant with another man's baby, and you're worried about privacy?" Look, I know this is complicated, but Dwayne isn't what you think he is. He's a good guy who's had some bad breaks, who's trying to turn his life around. The system has failed him over and over, and yeah, he's made some mistakes, but that doesn't define who he is as a person. Luis just stared at me. "Are you seriously defending him right now? Are you actually sitting there defending the guy you cheated on me with?" "I'm not defending anything. I'm trying to explain that this isn't some black and white situation where you get to be the victim and everyone else is evil. Dwayne has been through things you couldn't even imagine, and he's working hard to be better. Maybe if you'd spent half as much energy on our marriage as you do on your precious games, we wouldn't be in this situation." That's when something shifted in his expression, like a door slamming shut. "Right, this is my fault, of course. I didn't say it was your fault. But you can't pretend you've been present in this relationship, Luis. When was the last time we had a real conversation? When was the last time you asked me about my work, or my goals, or what I needed from you as a partner? You've been treating me like a roommate for months. So you decided to fuck one of your clients. That's your solution to feeling neglected. Don't reduce it to that. What Dwayne and I have is real. It's honest and complicated and messy, but it's real. He sees me for who I actually am, not just as some accessory to your success story." Luis stood up then, started pacing around the room like a caged animal. "Do you even hear yourself right now? Do you understand what you've done? You're going to be the 5th baby mama to a guy with a domestic violence record who's never held a steady job in his life. You threw away our marriage, our life together, for someone who will probably disappear the second that kid is born. That's not true. You don't know him like I do. I know enough. I had him investigated, Ariana. Professional background check, criminal history, financial records, the works. Your soulmate has 6 kids with 4 different women, none of whom he married, none of whom receive consistent child support. He's been arrested for beating up his last girlfriend, he's never filed a tax return, and he's semi-literate. But sure, tell me more about how he's misunderstood. The room started spinning a little bit. You had him investigated? What kind of person does that? The kind of person whose wife is having an affair with a violent criminal and lying about it for months. The kind of person who wants to know exactly what he's dealing with before he makes any decisions about his future. So what? You're gonna blackmail me? Threaten to expose him or get him in trouble with his probation officer or something? I'm not gonna do anything to him. I don't need to. You wanna be with him? Great. You can explain to your kid why daddy's never around, why you're living in some shitty apartment, working 2 jobs while he's off making babies with the next social worker who thinks she can save him. That's when it really hit me. He was serious. He wasn't trying to work things out or fight for our marriage or find some way to move past this. He was already planning his exit strategy, already thinking of me in past tense. So that's it? You're just gonna throw away 8 years because of one mistake? One mistake? He stopped pacing and looked at me like I'd grown a second head. You've been having an affair for months. You got pregnant by another man. You tried to manipulate me into having sex with you so you could pass off his baby as mine. That's not one mistake, Ariana. That's a pattern of choices. Fine. You want a divorce? Fine. But don't act like you're some innocent victim here. Hey, you checked out of this marriage long before I ever met Dwayne. You're right, he said, and his voice was calm again, controlled. I should have ended this sooner, should have recognized that we wanted different things, that we'd grown into different people. But I didn't cheat on you, I didn't lie to you, I didn't try to trick you into raising someone else's child. He went upstairs then, and I could hear him moving around in our bedroom, opening drawers and closets. When he came back down 20 minutes later with a suitcase and a duffel bag, I realized this was really happening. He was actually leaving, actually choosing to blow up our entire life instead of trying to work through this like adults. Where are you gonna go? I asked. Alan's got a spare room. I'll figure out something more permanent later. And then what? You're just gonna pretend the last 8 years didn't happen? He paused at the front door. Wave, look back at me one more time. I'm going to remember that I spent 8 years with someone I thought I knew, someone I thought shared my values and my vision for the future. And then I'm going to move on with someone who actually does. After he left, I sat in that living room for hours, trying to process what had just happened. Part of me kept expecting him to come back, to call and say he'd overreacted, to want to talk things through more rationally, but the phone never rang, and eventually I had to accept that this was real. My marriage was over, and somehow I was the villain in Luis's version of the story. I called Dwayne, told him what had happened, expected him to be supportive or at least sympathetic. Instead, he was quiet for a long time, then said, "Damn, baby, this is fucked up. I didn't mean for none of this to happen." "It's not your fault," I told him. "Luis was looking for an excuse to bail anyway. He's been checked out for months." "Yeah, but now he's gonna try to cause problems for me, you know? Probably call my PO, mess with my job situation. Rich guys like that, they got connections." "He's not gonna do anything like that. He's not vindictive." But even as I said it, I wasn't entirely sure it was true. The Luis who'd confronted me tonight wasn't the same person I'd married. There was something cold and calculating about the way he'd handled everything, like he'd been planning his moves for days or weeks. The investigation, the background check, the calm delivery of information he knew would hurt me. It all felt very strategic, very deliberate. The divorce proceedings were a nightmare. Luis hired some shark attorney who seemed determined to paint me as a manipulative cheater who deserved nothing. My lawyer kept telling me I had rights, that I was entitled to half of everything we'd built together. But somehow Luis's team managed to structure things so that most of the assets were tied up in his business or had been acquired before our marriage. In the end, I walked away with enough money for a decent apartment and 6 months of rent, which was better than nothing, but felt like a slap in the face considering how much his company was worth. "He's being generous," my lawyer said when I complained about the settlement offer. "Given the circumstances of the divorce, he could probably argue for you to get even less." Generous. Right. The man who'd shared my bed for 8 years thought he was being generous by making sure I wouldn't be homeless while carrying another man's child. The same man who used to talk about building a life together, about supporting each other's dreams and weathering whatever storms came our way. Apparently, those promises had fine print I'd never bothered to read. Dwayne was supportive through most of the legal drama, at least at first. He'd come by my new apartment, bring takeout, listen to me vent about lawyers and paperwork and Luis's increasingly cold behavior. But as my pregnancy became more obvious, as the reality of the situation set in, I could see him starting to pull away. He'd show up later, stay for shorter periods, always have some excuse about work or his other kids or drama with his ex. "I'm trying to be here for you," he'd say when I called him out on it, "but this is a lot, you know? I got my own shit to deal with." His own shit, right? The same shit he'd been dealing with for years. The same cycle of chaos and crisis that I'd been helping him navigate since the day we met. Apparently, my unconditional support was something he could take or leave, depending on how convenient it was for him. Now, here I am, 7 months pregnant and living alone in a 1-bedroom apartment that smells like the Indian restaurant downstairs. Dwayne comes by maybe once a week, usually when he needs something. Help with a job application, money for gas, someone to vent to about whatever woman is currently causing him problems. He talks about the baby sometimes, makes vague promises about being involved and doing better this time, but I can see the fear in his eyes. The same fear that was probably in the eyes of those other 4 women when they realized they were just another complication in his already complicated life. Luis, meanwhile, seems to be doing just fine. I heard through mutual friends that he's dating someone new, some marketing executive who went to Northwestern and has her own condo downtown. Someone age-appropriate and successful and uncomplicated, someone who probably thinks social work is a noble calling and would never dream of crossing professional boundaries with a client. Someone who fits into his world instead of trying to drag him into hers. I should be angry about that, should feel betrayed by how quickly he moved on, but mostly I just feel tired. Tired of defending choices that seemed so clear and justified at the time, but look increasingly stupid in hindsight. Tired of making excuses for Dwayne's inconsistency, for his inability to prioritize me and this baby the way I prioritized him when he needed me most. Tired of pretending this apartment and this life and this situation are somehow better than what I had before. The truth is, I did see something real in Dwayne. I still do sometimes when he lets his guard down and talks about wanting to be better, about being tired of disappointing people. But I'm starting to understand that seeing potential in someone and actually helping them reach it are 2 very different things. And maybe Luis was right about the pattern thing. Maybe this isn't the first time Dwayne has convinced a woman that she could be the one to save him, the one to finally give him a reason to change. But admitting that would mean admitting that I threw away 8 years of marriage for a fantasy, that I chose drama and chaos over stability and partnership, that I let my savior complex destroy the best relationship I've ever had. It would mean accepting that Luis's version of events, the one where I'm the villain who betrayed someone who loved me, might actually be closer to the truth than my own. So instead, I sit here in this apartment that smells like curry and listen to my upstairs neighbor's TV blaring through the thin walls, and I tell myself that at least I followed my heart. At least I chose passion over convenience, real connection over comfortable routine. At least I'm having a baby with someone who needed me, who saw me as more than just a wife-shaped accessory to his success story. Even if that someone can't seem to remember to call me back anymore.